Hello, fellow mech warriors, Mage Leader here. You know, when I'm conducting research for my BattleMech Primer videos, I do a lot of reading. I delve deep into Comstar's records to try and get a perspective on the various goings-on of the Inner Sphere, looking for the big picture so I can better understand what events led to the creation, adoption, and continued use of various battlemechs. While doing this, I come across all kinds of fascinating information, hidden details, and lesser-known stories. Things that the meme lords have never bothered with because learning about it requires an attention span beyond that of a goldfish. There are hundreds of stories throughout the Inner Sphere's history that are odd, abnormal, and sometimes downright hilarious. And while reading them, I developed a great desire to share some of them with you all. But since they have little to do with battlemechs, they warranted their own kind of video. On that note, welcome to the first installment of Weird Tales from the Inner Sphere, where I regale you with one of the less celebrated parts of our history. To my knowledge, no one else has covered the events in this format, and while I'm sure some of you have heard today's story already, I encourage you to put your hands down and sit quietly for the sake of our newcomers. Today we're going to learn about a bit of Curitan history that they're not particularly proud of, a chapter so dark that they don't like to talk about it. And if you know anything about Drac history, you know that's saying a great deal. Today, I'm going to tell you about the von Rohrs dynasty. Our story begins not with a von Rohrs, but with a Kurita, specifically Nihongi? Seriously? Nihongi? Fuck. Nihongi Kurita. He was the grandson of Shiro Kurita, the man who had forged the Draconis Combine through sheer determination and copious amounts of genocide. Nihongi's tenure as coordinator was largely uneventful, perhaps a bit too uneventful. Under his watch, the Combine's grip on the Principality of Rasselhag began to slip, and a rather curious kidnapping of his sister Oma led to a royal scandal when it turned out that she'd not only fallen in love with her captor, Jan Sorensen, but had also given birth to his child, creating a new bloodline with a potential claim to the throne. Indeed, the Sorensens would have a major role to play in the days ahead. A rational coordinator would have eliminated this potential rival, but Nihongi suffered from something known as apathy. That is to say, he was inept and didn't give a shit. Otherwise, his contribution to the story is fairly minor, save for two details. First, he sired Robert Kurita, and second, he had a love for horses. The Curitan stables were some of the proudest in human history, and Nihongi had a particular passion for these loyal animals. Horses have carried great men to victory in countless battles, and some would argue that they should truly be the creatures to be known as man's best friend. The horses in Nihongi's stables were kept perfectly groomed, were expertly trained, and have gone down in history as some of the most beautiful animals the world has ever seen. This passion for equestrian excellence was passed on to Nihongi's daughter, Marika Kurita. Marika was known to spend hours at a time in the stables admiring the beasts and taking them out on rides across the palace grounds, and she became quite close with many of the workers who managed the stables. Then, one fateful day, she met a particular stable hand, a young man by the name of Werner von Rohrs. Not much is known about Werner von Rohrs, except that he was a nobody, a man with no title or accomplishments, merely another laborer in the palace with no chance at advancing his position. It is unknown if he was ambitious or whether he was content with his position in life. What we do know is that he was good-natured, charming, and devilishly handsome. What exactly transpired between him and Marika has been the subject of countless essays, documentaries, romantic holofilms, and the occasional porno, but suffice to say that Marika began spending even more time in the stables, and the other stable hands began to notice that the hay bales always seemed to mysteriously collapse during the night. Nihongi Kurita would die a few years after the upcoming incident, drifting away as one of the least effective rulers in Combine history. His young son, Robert Kurita, had often been frustrated by his father's apathetic approach to rule, and was the polar opposite in terms of his personality. Robert was bold, impulsive, and often acted without thinking things through. This led to several political disasters and more than a few scandals even before he took the throne, but the one that would come back to haunt him occurred in 2393. After countless romps in the hay, Werner von Rohrs had fallen victim to the classic leg lock maneuver, and Marika was revealed to be pregnant. Robert flew into a fit of rage, marched into the stables, picked up the nearest shovel, and proceeded to beat the absolute shit out of Werner with it. And so ends the story of Werner von Rohrs, a no-name stable boy with weak pull-out game. Marika was understandably upset, and the incident made dinner time an awkward affair in the Kurita household, to say the least. She would give birth to a son and name him after her father, and also, despite her brother, after her lover. Nihongi von Rohrs was raised by a mother who craved vengeance, and the young man would grow up with a vile hatred in his soul for the Kurita bloodline, not to mention an inflated ego. He was taught from a very young age that the world had wronged him, and that one day, his destiny was to take it for himself. This is the attitude that would define the future of the Draconis Combine in the days to come. Nihongi Kurita died of a broken neck in 2396 when he fell off of his favorite horse, much to the surprise of Robert, who had been planning an assassination for some time. Robert had big plans for his reign, but his time as coordinator would be brief. As the Draconis Combine hurtled into the Age of War, Robert would make numerous blunders, earning him a foul reputation. In 2412, he was assassinated, and while it has never been confirmed, most historians agree that it was Marika who had arranged for his death. Robert's only son was too young for the throne, and so his brother Parker would be the coordinator until Jason Kurita came of age, which wouldn't end up happening. At age 17, Jason would ironically die in similar circumstances to Werner von Rohrs, losing a duel over the love of a girl. Marika and her son watched the political situation as it began to spiral. Parker Kurita would keep things from spinning completely out of control during the Age of War, but accomplished little of significance. All the while, Nihongi von Rohrs bided his time and waited. His opportunity came in 2419. Parker Kurita's only son, Saigo Kurita, was killed in battle, leaving no heirs in the Kurita bloodline. Nihongi began to make friends in high places, a captain here, a general there, and one fateful night 2 years later, he made his move. His friends arranged for a change of palace guards one evening, and when the sun rose the following morning, Parker Kurita was dead, and Nihongi von Rohrs was the coordinator. Nihongi was a vengeful ruler, and the dynasty he forged would lead the Draconis Combine into nearly a full century of suffering. If you thought Shiro Kurita was bad, Nihongi made him look like Pee Wee Herman. He didn't so much rule with an iron fist as he ruled with an iron sledgehammer. The slightest criticism, even a hint of discontent, would get a person's entire family killed. Make a joke about the rising price of breakfast cereal? Congratulations! You, your wife, your children, and your grandma all get to enjoy being skinned alive in the town square. Public torture and execution went from a semi-regular occurrence to a daily ritual, and if no legitimate victim could be found that day, then one would be selected. Neighbors turned on each other, eager to rat out their friends and family to shift suspicion away from themselves. As the Age of War took its toll, the Draconis Combine suffered both at home and abroad. A soldier who failed his duty could be labeled a dissident, and his family would be the ones to pay the price. It is impossible to know how many innocent people were murdered during this time, but the exact number matters little. The human mind cannot comprehend tragedies of that magnitude. We simply aren't equipped to process that level of trauma. I'm not exaggerating when I say that even at the height of his manic evil proclivities, Stefan Amaris did not reach the level of terror that Nihongi wielded over the Draconis Combine. The nation was locked in an abject nightmare, caught between the brutality of the ancient Roman Empire and the paranoia of the French Revolution and Soviet purges. Anyone could be slaughtered at any time for any reason, and with the coordinator's authority being absolute, there was little that could be done to oppose him. All the people of the Combine could do was hope for rescue, and that wouldn't happen for many years. Nihongi would go into seclusion soon after taking the throne. A deep-seated paranoia gripped him, as is often the case for rulers like him. The palace on New Samarkand became a fortress, a dead zone of information. For decades, no one knew what went on behind the walls, and to this day, neither do we. The upper levels of government were heavily compartmentalized, and the chain of command got so long that nobody knew who actually had the coordinator's ear. We don't know for sure when Nihongi died and his son Kozo took over. In fact, we don't even know what Kozo looked like. We don't know how long he lived, how many children he had, or how old he was when he became the coordinator. The secrecy of the von Rohrs was absolute, and for 89 years, their reign of terror had the Draconis Combine in an unshakable grip. But there was just one problem, something Nihagi hadn't counted on. Rasselhag women are hot. No, I'm serious. It doesn't seem to matter who controls that little sliver of space. Steiners, Curetans, even the clans cannot escape the gravitational pull of space Swede pussy. And in 2494, a pretty young lady from the Principality would set off a chain of events that would ultimately bring about the downfall of the von Rohrs. Her name was Ilyana Sorensen, and yes, she was one of those Sorensens we discussed earlier. Captain Martin McAllister was something of a rising star in the DCMS. He had earned his way into a position of prominence, and he quickly became one of the Dragon's most trusted assets. His loyalty was unwavering. Nothing could cause him to stray from the path. Nothing, that is, except a 15-year-old girl who lived next door. Yes, 15. Things were a little different 5 centuries ago.
Jail.
Martin met Ilyana at a dinner party hosted by her father, Blaine Sorensen, and were told that her charm, wit, and beauty were so great that they instantly overrode Martin's higher brain functions. I'm sure all of us guys have experienced something similar at some point. At this juncture, I feel it would be useful to give a brief summary of relations between Rasselhag and the Draconis Combine. Rasselhag was, if you ask the coordinator, conquered territory. In actuality, the DCMS had failed to take over the Principality save for a few key worlds, and the two nations had agreed to a tenuous alliance, a sort of joint rule over the territory. Rasselhag's leaders did not delude themselves. They knew that they had only bought their little territory a temporary reprieve, and they spent as much time as they could building their strength for the inevitable Curetan attack. Things were tense, and so diplomatic missions were frequent, though often unproductive. This was what had brought Martin McAllister to Rasselhag. Blaine Sorensen had a vested interest in Martin. He was rapidly gaining influence in the Combine. He had the incredibly rare trust of the von Rohrs, and on top of all that, he was madly, hopelessly in love with Blaine's daughter. Sorensen knew an opportunity when he saw one, and so he did not object in the slightest when Martin asked to marry Ilyana in secret. Martin would eventually return to the Draconis Combine with a smile on his face and lipstick on his collar, but he managed to keep his marriage a secret. Over the next few years, he would continue his rise to glory, climbing the social ladder and gaining powerful allies. He would also make frequent diplomatic visits to Rasselhag, though these were nearly always a mere excuse to go back and bone his wife. All that passion would quickly bear fruit, and Ilyana gave birth to their daughter, Siriwan, in 2496. Siriwan McAllister would inherit not only her mother's charm and good looks, but also her grandfather's gift for shrewd statecraft. Indeed, she would go on to be perhaps the most important woman in Draconis Combine history, but the early years of her life would be marred by tragedy. Ilyana was a loving mother, but her time with her daughter was short-lived. In 2499, she was killed in, of all things, a water skiing accident at the age of 20. Siriwan would be taken in by Blaine Sorensen, who raised her as his own daughter. She would learn from him the Machiavellian arts that would serve her so well in adulthood. Martin was devastated by the loss of his wife and chose to bury his sorrow by becoming a workaholic. He doubled down on his career, and within 2 years, he was in a position of supreme influence in the royal court. He still had never laid eyes on the von Rohrs, but he had helped to engineer the downfall of the current coordinator and install Kruger von Rohrs on the throne. Following this, Martin would continue to exert his influence even further, rapidly becoming one of the most powerful men in the Draconis Combine. Blaine Sorensen did not sit idly by while these events played out. He continued to build his army, strategically placing them along the border regions, and waited for the right moment. That moment would finally arrive in 2510. Blaine's forces launched a surprise attack on the Draconis Combine. The assault was ferocious, and it smashed a gaping hole in the Combine's defenses. The DCMS had been caught totally flat-footed. The prospect of the conquered Scandinavian nation launching an invasion had been unthinkable, so unthinkable that there was no contingency plan in place for when it occurred. This was what Blaine and Martin had been counting on. The invasion could have progressed further, but that was never the intention. The attack was merely a diversion, and as the bulk of the DCMS raced for the front lines, Martin McAllister made his move. In a stunning display that was eerily similar to the maneuver Nihongi von Rohrs had pulled decade before, Martin and his allies stormed the palace grounds on New Samarkand. They successfully gained entry and quickly encountered a problem. There were dozens of people living in the palace. Servants, nobles, a harem, and probably even a panhandler because those guys are fucking everywhere. After 89 years in seclusion, there was no possible way of knowing who was who, and when the staff started pulling the I Am Spartacus act, the simple, albeit brutal solution quickly presented itself. Martin McAllister killed everyone he didn't recognize, and even a few of those he did. Men, women, children, and even their pets were gunned down. None of the von Rohrs escaped. Martin took no chances. Before anyone could begin to process what had just happened, McAllister was already making his next move. He took control of all the major broadcast networks and made an announcement. The von Rohrs were dead, and he was now the coordinator of the Draconis Combine. But he wasn't just some tyrant here to take the throne by force. Years prior, as a condition for marrying Ilyana, Blaine Sorensen had made him take a genetics test. Shiro Kirita, in addition to being a crazed murderous asshole, had also been a notorious womanizer. He had made no effort to contain the spread of his seed, and Martin McAllister had definitive scientific proof that he was, in fact, a direct descendant of Shiro. For the first time in almost a century, a Kirita now ruled the Draconis Combine. Peace settled over the Draconis Combine following Martin McAllister's ascension. The Age of Terror was over, and the nation soon returned to its regularly scheduled programming. The wars against Steiner and Davian became less fiery, and perhaps for the first time ever, the coordinator turned his attention to internal affairs. Things were looking up for the average citizen. Life wasn't just better than it had been under the von Rohrs, it was better than it had ever been. Things got so quiet that Martin summoned Siriwan to join him on New Samarkand. Siriwan had grown up happy on Rosselhag, and she deeply loved her grandparents. Palace life was a rude awakening, and she quickly developed a distaste for the courtiers she was forced to interact with. There were no friends to be made on New Samarkand, only allies and useful tools. Though she loved her father, she disliked living in his shadow, but she had one of the sharpest minds ever conceived, and she adapted to the machinations quickly. It was, after all, what her grandfather had been preparing her for. She could not succeed her father as coordinator since the Draconis Combine has strong traditionalist views and would not allow a woman to rule, so Siriwan tasked her staff with combing the archives to find her a husband, preferably one who could be easily influenced. In 2515, Martin McAllister's peaceful reign came to an abrupt end. Still mourning the loss of his wife, he had taken to adultery in a vain effort to fill the hole her death had left in his soul. One night, he chose the wrong woman to take into his bed, and what started as some kinky choking quickly went south. Martin's partner for the evening was actually an assassin, and he died with her hands around his throat. Whether or not he managed to get his rocks off beforehand is the subject of much debate among historians and perverts across the inner sphere to this day. Siriwan would replace him, much to the displeasure of the Combine nobility. While she tried to rule as coordinator, she was seen by most as an outsider, and her ascension was seen as a dangerous subversion of their values. Fortunately, within a couple months, Warren Kirita would appear on New Samarkand to be decorated for his contributions in the field of battlefield engineering. Warren was only tangentially related to the main Kirita bloodline, a fact that had spared him from death during the von Rohrs years, but he was close enough to satisfy the nobility. Siriwan invited him to the palace and quickly found him to be intelligent, kind-hearted, soft-spoken, and above all, unambitious. What exactly transpired behind closed doors isn't certain, but the two were married within a week of their first meeting, and Warren became the coordinator, albeit in name only. Warren was an engineer, not a politician, and he left most of the affairs of state to Siriwan. Outwardly, she was a loving, affectionate wife, and the two were quite happy together. Then, Siriwan got pregnant and had a son. Within a year, Warren was dead. Officially, he died of food poisoning while on a family vacation. I'm not saying that Siriwan poisoned him, but actually, yes I am. Siriwan totally fucking murdered him. Naturally, their son Hihiro was too young to become the coordinator, and so Siriwan graciously accepted the title of regent, temporarily assuming the authority of the coordinator until Hihiro came of age, which wouldn't actually end up happening until he was 40 years old, And even when Suriwen officially stepped down, she remained her son's chief advisor. Suriwen's reign was even more productive than her father's, and under her, the Draconis Combine flourished like never before. She wisely left military matters to those who knew more than her, and kept her attention focused on internal and diplomatic affairs. It is her bloodline that continues to this day, and while you'll never get a Drek to admit this, the royal lineage of the Draconis Combine today is closer to Blaine Sorensen than Shiro Kurita. That's right, the Draconis Combine is ruled by people with more Rasselhog DNA than Kuritan. Cope and seethe, Kenichi wankers. Cope and seethe. The von Rohrs affair has been buried in Kuritan history for a myriad of reasons. It's an embarrassing stain on their noble ancestry, a humiliation at nearly every turn. Their nation was overtaken by the son of a stable boy and transformed into a nightmare that not even the most evil men in history could have envisioned. They were powerless to free themselves and had to be rescued by old enemies, a nation they had thought crushed, and in the end, a foreign woman would be the one to re-establish their lineage, and even then only tangentially. Kuritan society looks to its past for inspiration, sugarcoating events in order to demonstrate their greatness. A chapter like this one doesn't exactly fit the bill, but they haven't forgotten it entirely. There are deep scars from this event that define the Combine to this day. It's the reason that they have such a strong stigma against illegitimate children. It's the reason purity is one of their chief virtues. It also led to their habitual distrust of outsiders, though this was already a fairly strong part of their culture beforehand. The von Rohrs changed the Draconis Combine in ways that can never fully be appreciated. Generations of people lived under their jackboot, and having seen the worst that humanity can be, the Kuritan is afraid of nothing. No matter how evil and scary you are, they've survived worse, or at least their ancestors did. It's given them a ruggedness that is unrivaled in the inner sphere, and continues to define them as a people, no matter how eager they are to bury the truth. For the rest of us, the von Rohrs serve as more than an interesting footnote. They are a cautionary tale, a warning about what can happen when one man's rule is absolute and the people are left without recourse. It is a lesson that the Combine learned too late, and so instead it shuts its eyes and pretends it never happened. To them it is a myth, Davian propaganda, but Comstar has a longer memory, and it's from their records that I've pulled my information. I've studied the history, and at the end of it all, the research has led me to draw the only possible conclusion. Hot babes from Rasselhog can fix anything. Oh, alright. You want an actual moral at the end of the story? Fine. Don't give evil guys total control over your government. I know, deep thoughts here at Mage HQ. While we're at it, look both ways before crossing the street, don't forget to tell your mom you love her, if applicable, and make sure you're drinking enough water. That's all I've got. I didn't come here to preach at you. I just read a story and thought it was neat, so I decided to share it with you as well. Thank you for indulging me. And until next time, this is Mage Leader, signing off.